I'm continuing the podcast series this month on boundaries. In the first episode, we talked about why boundaries matter. Then we talked about boundaries around sex in a sexless marriage. Last episode, we talked about boundaries around criticism. Today, we are talking about respect and what to do to help protect your dignity in your marriage when respect is lacking. Bruce Abbott, certified professional coach, founder of SecureHusband.com. This is an area that gets brought up a lot in guys that I coach. This idea of respect. Something in their marriage, whether it is the tone of voice, whether it is the criticism, like we talked about last podcast, whatever it is, it's fueled by an underlying current of disrespect. I get these comments in my coaching sessions when guys are like, she just doesn't respect me. She talks to me like I'm one of the kids, like I'm stupid. Criticizing, we talked about criticism last podcast, dismissing his point of view, criticizing in front of the kids. They're hurt, they're frustrated, and this will fuel resentment. A lot of guys are trying to figure out, well, how do I get respect back? And this is an area where guys get stuck because usually trying harder, as you know, makes things worse, especially if you're talking about an anxious avoidant dynamic with a dismissive avoidant wife. Trying harder to get respect often backfires. So a lot of the same boundaries that you use for criticism to help protect your dignity are very similar to what you would use to help rebuild self-respect in a marriage. Because without respect, there is no attraction. In order to get respect, to earn respect from your wife, you must have self-respect first. And without self-respect, you're not going to create that polarity that draws your wife back towards you. And this is why boundaries are very important when it comes to respect. And also without self-respect, boundaries are going to be impossible to hold. Go back to when we're talking about, again, the nervous system. Boundaries, you have to have your nervous system regulated to be able to hold those boundaries. When you can regulate your nervous system, your behaviors and your reactions help foster respect. Respect in a marriage. What is respect? What it is not. Respect is not controlling your wife. Respect does not mean dominance or authority. Respect does not mean that your wife has to agree with everything that you say, your way or the highway. That's not respect. Respect is dignity. Respect is being treated as an equal partner. You guys are not going to see eye to eye on everything. But if respect means being spoken to and speaking with, decency, basic decency, if you're listening when the other person is speaking and you're not mocking or belittling, you're not attacking their character, they're not attacking your character during conflict. There's a saying, being able to fight fair. It certainly is not dismissing your emotions or theirs. Again, respect goes both ways. And humiliating your partner. If you feel like you're being humiliated, then that's an area of disrespect that needs addressing. So respect is the foundation that allows you to disagree without destroying the relationship, without destroying the connection. Because when respect erodes, every little disagreement will become a major battle. Sometimes there are key events that cause one to lose respect, but usually respect disappears over time. It erodes slowly through small moments that go unaddressed. It could be sarcastic comments all the time, being interrupted all the time. Maybe it's a tone of voice. It's the eye roll. All of these things lead to little micro moments that accumulate over time that build disrespect. Respect also erodes when you abandon yourself. I talk a lot about self-abandonment. If you find yourself constantly apologizing if you didn't do anything wrong, or you're constantly backing down just to avoid conflict, just to keep the peace, but especially if you tolerate the disrespect to keep the peace. And that is the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today with boundaries. tolerating disrespect. And this all goes back to your nervous system, because your nervous system may be communicating the message that my boundaries are weak, that they're flexible. People will then subconsciously adjust their behavior based on what we tolerate. Again, it's subconscious, but the patterns will form. And so this idea of disrespect, tolerating disrespect. And anxious guys struggle so much with respect boundaries because somewhere growing up, again, there's this idea that we had to earn love. And to earn love, we had to be the good guy, the peacemaker, the one who absorbs all of somebody else's frustration so that we hope that they will calm down and relax. We took all of that as a child onto our shoulders. That's how we became maybe hypervigilant. That's how we learned to read the room. That's how we learned to walk on eggshells. That is how we learn to survive in childhood. In adult relationships, I've talked about this a lot, how that leads to the self-abandonment because you become overly tolerant and you avoid conflict and confrontation. And if there is something that makes you angry, you're stuffing it because your expression of your anger will trigger the other person. And so when you feel disrespected all the time, the relationship is unbalanced. It's not something you intentionally meant to do. It's just you never learned how to assert boundaries in a calm, grounded way. So the resentment grows, and now it's like blood in the water to sharks. That's where the disrespect starts to come in. Because the respect you want from your partner starts with something that you probably have never really had in your life, and that is true, subconscious, down deep in the core, self-respect. Now, we think we respect ourselves. If I went and asked 10 guys that I work with, do you respect yourself? Well, yes. And then you go and look at, do your actions reflect that? Is what you tolerate reflecting that? So when we're talking about respect and boundaries around respect, yes, these are external boundaries for others, but as you know, listening to this podcast series, there are a lot of boundaries we have to hold to ourselves. There's times where we have to look at it from the external and for the internal. So let's talk about the external first. The thing about respect and boundaries is there's a misconception that with boundaries, there's a difference between being aggressive and assertive. Many men and a lot of women in the comments that I get sometimes on my material say that setting boundaries means being aggressive. It does not. Aggression says, you better stop talking to me like that. Assertiveness says, I'm not willing to continue this conversation if I'm spoken to disrespectfully. Do you see how aggression is like poking the bear? It's escalating the conflict. It's pouring fuel on the fire because you are trying to stand your ground, but by going after that other person and trying to get them to change. Assertiveness is just stabilizing yourself. Be like, no, I am not going to continue this conversation. Aggression really can escalate conflict, where assertiveness oftentimes can de-escalate it. I'm not going to sit in here and be spoken to like that. When you're ready to have a civil conversation, I'm willing to come back and try this again. Dismissive avoidant partners react very poorly to aggression because it triggers their sense of defectiveness and shame, but they do respond better to calm clarity, the assertiveness. When you can speak calmly and then disengage from disrespectful behavior, and that's what this idea of boundaries looks like, disengaging when it's necessary. I'm not saying you withdraw and sulk and get butthurt and go pout, and I'm not talking about that in terms of disengaging. I'm talking about standing calm, grounded. I am disengaging from this conversation if I'm spoken to disrespectfully. Do you see how that changes the dynamic? And you're not pouring fuel on the fire of conflict. You're embracing conflict. You're saying, I'm willing to have this maybe tough conversation with you, but it has to be done respectfully. So that's where you start to see boundaries come up with respect. You will know when you are being disrespected. I mean, if you are being dismissed, if your opinions don't matter, if you're trying to communicate something and your partner just talks all over you and interrupts you, sarcasm. Oh my gosh, sarcasm is the thing with sarcasm. A lot of people use it in a very passive aggressive way. So they use sarcasm to dig disrespectfully. One thing too that is very interesting, if you've got a partner that vents about you to their friends or to family, or God forbid, I see this on social media. People that they will disrespect their partners on social media, both men and women. So if you're criticized in public, that's another thing. Just the idea here is if you are being minimized, if your emotions are being minimized, your thoughts, your opinions, your attempts to communicate, if they are minimized and shut down, you are seeing disrespect. So that's another thing I want to be clear, that there is being able to have conflict and being able to work through conflict. Every marriage has frustrations. Every marriage has disagreements. But when you can work through them respectfully, but again, it's when you see these other areas, that's where patterns of disrespect come in. And so the boundaries become necessary. Let's go back. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but let me come back here to this idea of boundaries around respect. The boundaries around respect are going to be very calm. They're going to be very grounded. You are not going to be triggered because you're doing nervous system regulation, right? When you feel minimized, when you feel disrespected, the boundary is going to come very simply, calmly. Babe, I'm willing to talk about this, but not if we're attacking each other. Right there, you were talking directly to your wife about what you will and will not accept in this conversation. Babe, if this conversation turns disrespectful, I'm going to step away and we can revisit it later. You're not saying I'm avoiding the problem, because that's the feedback we tend to get. You're just trying to avoid the issue. No, I'm willing to talk about this, but not in a disrespectful tone. It gives you the ability to say, okay, babe, I hear your concerns. I want to hear your concerns, but I'm having a hard time doing that while you're speaking to me that way. If you want me to hear what you have to say, then this conversation needs to be more respectful, and then I can listen. You're not controlling her behavior. You're not trying to make her do anything. You're defining the conditions in which you will participate in the conversation. That's the key to boundaries. That's what this whole month is about. It's your self-regulation of your participation in what you will and will not accept. It's not trying to dismiss the point that your wife may be making in an issue or whatever. You're just saying, this is how the conversation will go for me to participate in it. Because the most powerful boundaries around respect is going to be around this idea of disengaging. So disengagement is your number one tool in your toolkit for boundaries. So when a conversation does become disrespectful or hostile, a lot of anxious guys will stay in the fire and try to fix it. And they'll try to do it by defending themselves and trying to convince their partner or explaining more or backing down or all of these things that when we're triggered and emotions escalate, we try to logic ourselves through it, but logic does not work when your nervous system is triggered and you are in these moments of disrespect. The conversation for a calm boundary, you can say, babe, this conversation isn't productive right now. Let's take a break and we'll come back to it later. And then you step away. Disengagement is your number one tool. And when you do disengage, you do it calmly. Don't go and slam the door or huff and puff and sigh and get passive aggressive. No, babe, this conversation is sounding disrespectful. I'm not sure we're going to be making any progress. We need to take a break and come back to it later. That protects both people, number one, from saying things that are going to damage the relationship further, but you're just calmly removing yourself from the escalation. So disengagement is a huge boundary. And this will help you stop feeling like you're your wife's punching bag when things go wrong. that it's always your fault, or I have to try harder, I have to defend myself, or I'm just going to shut down. None of that stuff works. You have to practice a new response. When the tone becomes disrespectful, you say, hey, babe, I'm willing to talk about the issue, but not if we're blaming each other and speaking disrespectfully. And then you stop. You stop arguing. That may trigger your wife, and she may escalate it, and that's why nervous system regulation is so important. She may get triggered when you do that, but you stay calm. Eventually, what will happen is the arguments will shorten, not because you don't ever disagree again. It's because the dynamic changes on how the rules are played out. We can talk about these things, but not disrespectfully. And so that's how the dynamic changes. That's how you begin to earn respect in the marriage, because it all starts with how you see yourself. Boundaries around respect only work when you believe deep in your core that you deserve respect. Many anxious men struggle with that. They don't realize that. It's subconscious. Because that inner child inside of you may still be thinking, if I just improve enough, she'll finally respect me. But respect is not earned through perfection and performance. Respect grows when you carry yourself with grounded self-worth. No unnecessary apologizing. There are guys that will say sorry that they don't even know what they're saying sorry for. And conflict is part of marriage. It's part of a healthy marriage. But you don't shrink during that conflict. And you don't retaliate and get angry and explode during that conflict. Because then you're abandoning your integrity, you're abandoning your values, and you stay present so that your voice doesn't disappear. So you remain calm and open and solid, because those external boundaries help protect your dignity. But as you know, because you've listened to this podcast series all month, or at least so far, we also have internal boundaries, and that's where the deeper work happens. You've got to build that nervous system that can tolerate the tension. Because when you start holding boundaries, remember, conflict, it may be triggering. Those boundaries, holding those boundaries will be triggering. You have to be able to be regulated enough to continue to hold that boundary. Babe, I can't be part of this conversation when it's disrespectful. And then she ramps it up. Okay, babe, if this conversation continues to be disrespectful, I'm going to need to leave, and we can revisit this later when everybody's calm. When that goes even higher, okay, babe, I am now leaving. I have communicated that I will not be part of this conversation as the disrespectful tone continues. Do you see how now you may have to take that boundary up another level, and then up another level, and then up another level? The inner boundary inside of you is, I can hold ground emotionally without collapsing when this happens. That's the boundary you hold with yourself. That's why the nervous system regulation, again, is so important. It is the key to boundaries. I will hammer that over and over this month. Because that's the thing. Okay, what if I set boundaries and disrespect continues? First of all, you increase the boundary as needed. Disengagement, that's your big tool. You remove yourself from a situation. What happens when this becomes a pattern? What happens if you are constantly having to do this and respect doesn't return? Again, it's all about clarity. This is where clarity becomes important, because boundaries reveal truth. They're going to show you whether your partner is willing to engage in a healthier dynamic or not. If respect never returns, that becomes information. That's data that you've gathered, and you have to evaluate that data. Because living indefinitely in disrespect will destroy your self-esteem. It will destroy your dignity. See, protecting your dignity is not selfish. It's healthy. It's necessary. You may be told that it's not. You may be made to believe that it's not. But protecting your dignity is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. When gathering data, gathering information, that will tell you the future of this relationship. You will begin to see where your partner stands. If your partner all of a sudden starts to work with you and engage in that healthier dynamic, then that's great. That means that you guys are starting to get on the same page. If it never returns, And the more that you hold the boundaries, the worse the situation gets, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, well, then you have to start asking the tough questions about the future of this relationship. I will say this over and over and over again in these podcasts. This is not about saving your marriage. Can it save your marriage? Yes, it can. Can it sometimes bring your marriage to an overdue end? Yes, it can. This is about becoming a secure man, not about controlling your partner. It's not about demanding her obedience. It's becoming a man who lives with self-respect. And wherever this relationship goes, when you live with self-respect is where it goes, outcome independence. But you become someone who communicates your boundaries and you do it calmly and you don't abandon yourself in conflict. That protects your dignity, protects the dignity of the relationship. Respect in marriage does not come from fear. It comes from two people who value each other. They value each other's humanity. That begins with how you treat yourself and how you allow others to treat you. Boundaries, respect, so important. I hope this podcast was helpful for you. I hope you're enjoying this series. We're going to be talking more about boundaries this entire month and how we are able to hold boundaries tells a lot about the future of our relationships. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're a regular listener and you listen to this podcast every time it comes out, would you go give me a review? That helps the algorithm share this with more men who need this healing. And if you need one-on-one help to establish boundaries and help hold boundaries, I encourage you, visit securehusband.com. Fill out that form for a free 30-minute consultation, just a conversation that you and I have. There's no sales pitch. We just talk about whether one-on-one coaching is right for you. And I'll see you on the next Secure Husband podcast. Thanks for listening.